In the tapestry of life, where every thread holds a story, America in Black and White emerges as a haven for the voices echoing through the heart of our communities. In this podcast, we wade through the rivers of our collective experiences, celebrating the vibrant hues of change brought forth by the whispers of hope and the roars of action. It's more than just a conversation. It's a journey into the heart of our society, illuminated by the light of those daring to dream and do. Join us, and let your voice be the melody that guides us toward a dawn where every color finds its place in the masterpiece of our shared destiny. Together, let's paint a future brimming with the positives that dwell in our minds and the actions that shape our world.
Tonight, before we bring out our incredible guests, I want to take a moment, as I always do on America in Black and White, to honor the giants who walked before us, to reflect on the shoulders we stand on, to remember that Black excellence is not a trend, it is a tradition. And today, we celebrate a man whose music shook continents, defined empires, and reminded the world that people cannot be silenced, not when they have a trumpet. His name is Hugh Masekela, born on April 4th, 1939, in the township of Witbank, not known as a Malalini in South Africa. He left this earth on January 23rd, 2018, in Johannesburg at the age of 78. But the music he made, the movement he built, and the move he poured into every note lives forever. The world knew him simply as Hugh Masekela, widely and reverently called the father of South African jazz. Hugh grew up during one of the darkest periods in South African history, the brutal reign of apartheid, a system designed to crush the spirit, strip the identity, and silence the voice of Black people. But no system, no matter how violent, no matter how powerful, can silence music that comes from the soul. At just 14 years old, a young Hugh was handed his first trumpet by Archbishop Trevor Huddleston, the beloved anti-apartheid chaplain who believed that art was a form of liberation. That single trumpet changed everything. Hugh didn't just learn an instrument, he led a revolution. His schoolmates rallied around him, and together they formed the Huddleston Jazz Band, the first youth orchestra in the history of South Africa. And when the great Louis Armstrong himself heard about this remarkable young band across the ocean, he was so moved that he gifted Hugh one of his own personal trumpets. That is the kind of spirit Hugh Masekela carried from the very beginning. In 1960, at just 21 years old, Hugh was forced to leave his homeland. South Africa's apartheid government was tightening its grip. He departed into exile, an exile that would last 30 years. 30 years away from the land he loved, the people he cherished, the soil that shaped him. He made his way to New York City, where he enrolled at the Manhattan School of Music and immersed himself in a golden era of jazz, watching legends like Miles Davis, John Coltrane, and Thelonious Monk perform nightly, learning from Dizzy Gillespie and sharpening the unique Afro jazz sound that should become his signature. And then the world took notice. In 1967, Hugh Masekela stepped onto the stage of the Monterey Pop Festival alongside Janis Joplin, Jimi Hendrix, and Otis Redding, not as a curiosity, not as a novelty, but as a peer, as a giant. 1 year later, in 1968, his infectious, life-affirming instrumental single, Grazing in the Grass, shot to #1 on the American pop charts. A Black South African man living in exile from a country that tried to erase him had the #1 song in the United States of America. Let that sink in. But Huma Sekula never let fame pull him away from purpose. His music was always more than music. It was a weapon against apartheid and a celebration of African joy. Songs like Soweto Blues captured the grief of a people massacred for demanding their freedom, and Bring Him Back Home, Nelson Mandela, became a rallying cry heard around the entire world. A song that helped shift global consciousness toward the liberation of South Africa's greatest son. Over his extraordinary career, Hugh collaborated with some of the most iconic artists of the 20th century. Miriam Makeba, his former wife and kindred spirit in the fight for freedom, Paul Simon on his landmark Graceland tour, the incomparable Fela Kuti, Harry Belafonte, Stevie Wonder, and Marvin Gaye. He released more than 40 albums spanning 5 decades. In 2004, he published his compelling autobiography, Still Grazing, The Musical Journey of Hugh Masekela, book that Vanity Fair described by saying, "You'll be in awe of the many lives packed into one." And in June 2010, Hugh Masekela opened the FIFA World Cup kickoff concert in South Africa, the first World Cup ever held on African soil. He had come full circle. The man who left in exile returned to open the world's greatest celebration on the continent he never stopped loving. Brothers and sisters, Hugh Masekela's story is our story. It is the story of what happens when talent meets purpose, when pain is transformed into power, when a people refuse to be silent. He played his trumpet, not just as an instrument, but as a declaration. We are here. We have always been here, and we're not going anywhere. As we move through this episode, talking about Black entrepreneurship, mental health, community, and identity, let the spirit of Hugh Masekela remind us our excellence is not new, our resilience is ancient, and every time we build something, heal something, teach something, or speak truth to power, we're playing our own version of Hugh's trumpet. We are carrying the song forward. Let me introduce our wonderful guest. Our guest is Mr. Michael Allen Chest. He's been here before. And tonight, this phenomenal man has got a lot that we're going to be sharing here in this next episode. Michael is a man who is doing the real work. We're talking about a certified life coach, a licensed therapist, a published author, an entrepreneur, a speaker, and a community advocate, all wrapped into one extraordinary human being. You may know him as Professor C. His real name is Allen Michael Chest, and what he's building in the mental health space in the world of Black entrepreneurship is nothing short of revolutionary. We're going to get into his story, his passion, his books, his business, and his blueprint for healing our community. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Michael Allen Chest. Hello, sir. Hello?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. I can hear you now.
Oh, perfect. How are you?
I am just excellent. How are you?
I'm doing well. Doing well.
Well, I appreciate you for being back.
Absolutely.
And is there anything you'd like to say to the audience before we get into the show?
Just thank you all for having me here again. It is a pleasure to speak about my experiences, especially as it relates to empowerment, creativity, and also mental health. That I'm passionate about where these areas in my life have aligned and created what I'm calling the mental movement, and my mission as Professor C to reach the people, empower others to find their unique voices and make an impact in marginalized communities.
Yes, sir. And the place that I would love to start, is where we get to, your education and psychology.
Mm-hmm.
Um, So can you walk us through your academic journey from your earliest days in school to earning your advanced degrees in psychology and counseling? And what was that path like?
Yeah. So I am the oldest of six children. I have three brothers and two sisters. Growing up, an 80s baby, but being raised in the 90s, I think it was a different time compared to now. So I think for my upbringing was right before cell phones and internet became a thing. When AOL used to make that crazy sound when you plugged it into the wall. So a little bit before all the technology and things we have now. I'm still a part of the generation that remembers payphones and all of those things. And I think that offers a unique lens that you come from a time where you were the in between, that you know what it was like before all this technology, and now you know what it's like to utilize technology and what we do. So, back then, not having cell phones and things, old school, writing things down on paper was beneficial at the time. Um, I come from healthcare on both sides of my family. So I would say that for me being the oldest, there was certainly a high expectation for me to succeed, and kind of be that example, at least as it relates to education. I've always been called bright or ahead of my time, gifted, terms that were kind of used back then, for kiddos like me that were very unique. I think that I've always kind of been a forward, progressive thinker, even at a young age. My mom said that, my dad said that. Just the terms used is very smart or old soul, right? These types of things that were used to describe kids of that time. So through that lens, recognizing that very early on, I took a liking to language, words, even as early as like 6, 7 years old, writing my first poem, called Why, that I wrote when I was 6.5, 7 years old, I believe. That poem won a national poetry competition in the United States at that time, and I was 7 years old. So I was always pretty, again, just pretty much advanced, I would say, just in terms of my intellectual capacity. Through that, I was held to a high standard. I'll just say that. It was a different time. I was held to a very high standard. It was expected that I would be bringing home honor roll, right? A, B's, and if you were gonna bring home a C, it better be one. But you better make it up, right? So it was like you had to have A's and B's. The goal has always been A's, right? But that if you had a B or two, like that's okay. But we want to get all A's. If you have a C, that's all right. But we can't get anything below that. So I think that the standard was set very high for me, from a very young age and kind of leading up into my education. Through that, I think that discipline certainly helped me to be able to master a lot of things at a very young age. So being able to be trained in multiple disciplines, not just education, but singing, creative writing, piano, dancing, all these things simultaneously happening as I'm pursuing like higher education and wanting to bring home that honor roll report card. So um, I would say my mom wanted us to get uh, a more of a quality education that we can get than we could get at the time from Faraday, Louisiana versus like Springfield, Massachusetts. I think Massachusetts obviously is known for education and healthcare. So her having us move there when I was about, I want to say 10 or 11, we were able, that was back in like 2000, somewhere around there. But I would say Massachusetts certainly was the place for me in terms of my development. It certainly matched my advancement in thinking for sure. And I've had a lot of opportunities to be involved in different types of things as it relates to education in Massachusetts, being a part of different like poetry clubs and academic groups, often serving as like the leader in multiple environments in college. Like I was the co-director of the Westfield State So Seductive Step team. I was the editor-in-chief of Prism Magazine. I was the co-director of the Westfield State Poetry Slam team. I was a member of the Night Owls a cappella group. I was a singer and a pianist for the Westfield State Urban Education Gospel Choir. I was doing all of this at the same time while I was maintaining a full-time education at Westfield State University. Also taking on creating a group that I called the movement at the time. Well, I hope we can get to speak about the movement because that's where the mental movement comes from. But the movement at the time was really about fighting against adversity and kind of being a voice for people of color on a predominantly white campus and some of the things that we experienced when I was in school. So certainly things I would hope we would get the chance to talk about. But I feel like because I had so much expectation on me to be great, I did not disappoint. I would say that I certainly doubted myself, sure, a lot of times, feeling like, do I have what it takes? Kind of having those things kind of creep into your head, but also realizing that beyond it being things that I hope to accomplish for myself, it is for the community that, I'm here for, not just for me, but for other members of my family and my ancestors who have paved the way for me to sit in this seat and talk on this show tonight.
I got to tell you, that's fascinating that, especially as a young adult, that you were able to do that many things, but that many things contributed to you
Mhm.
being the outstanding individual that you are today. Can you tell us, like, as you were going through those things, to get to where you are today, can you tell us, like, what was the main driving point? What was the one thing that you kept in your mind that kept you so inspired and motivated to do all those things?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that because I grew up with helpers as family members, like my father, my mother, my grandmothers on both sides, I think that I had a spirit of wanting to help others, wanting to empower others, because I was able to realize at a very young age that I had many people over the years pouring into my cup and not realizing exactly why they were doing that necessarily. But having like these mentors over the years, I think in some regard, I would call them earth angels, right? That people that kind of know what your path is meant to be, and you're still trying to catch up and figure it out. I think me being able to succeed was my way to pay homage to those who believed in me and wanted me to see the same things that they saw from a very young age. I certainly went through a lot of doubt, feeling different at times, or like I didn't really necessarily fit in because I was really ahead of the curve in a lot of regards. So I think that definitely made me feel isolated at times, or like I didn't feel like I could relate. So what it did offer me was the opportunity to lead. So if I was the odd duck out, I wasn't necessarily sitting at anyone else's table. I was creating the table, and I was offering people to come sit at the table that I cultivated on my own, because I found in my mind that there was a different path to go. Some people say go to A, go to B, and I'm like, no, I'm going to create a new letter in the alphabet. That is the way that I've kind of thought in life, um, that we don't necessarily need to think within a straight line or try to fit into a box that we were never necessarily designed to fit in. I believe, with all these things, that so very often people want you to check off a box. You're right at this, you're right or that. And I'm like, no, I'm gonna be this and I'm gonna be that, right? So that I decide my identity, and I think that that is what it's rooted in, right? That my identity is rooted in going against the grain and creating my own path, not because I want to necessarily shake up foundations or systems, but I want to be that person to show others that there's always another way, despite what people might tell you.
Well, so what specifically drew you to psychology as a discipline? Was there a course, a professor, a book, or a personal experience that locked you in?
Yeah. So I would say, I think I mentioned this on the first show we had. So whoever hasn't seen that one, please go back and watch part one. This is part two.
Mhm.
But what I believe I had said then was that I didn't want to go to college initially, right? But remembering that I did have the potential, but I was just really kind of hyper focused on music for a lot of it. I was doing all these things, but in my mind, I'm like, I'm still gonna be a musician. I'm still gonna get this record deal. Like that's the goal. Like AM the singer. That was all I wanted to be. It's like, yeah, people are saying I'm smart. People say I can do this and that, but it's singing. It's music. That's me. But having the urban education program at Westfield State University, it was called the urban education program. It's now called the Lead Scholars program at Westfield State University, which was a program dedicated to recruiting individuals such as myself, children of students of color or students from rural or urban areas to have the opportunity to participate in that academic boot camp over the summer to prove that you had what it takes to matriculate into the school year as a full-time student. So I believe having those peer counselors, we have other students higher up that went through the same process that we were getting ready to go through. It was a very intensive academic process. I'll tell you that it was very tough, and they expected nothing less than excellent. There was no room for error. And we knew that, right? We knew what they made it very clear what we were signing up for. That if you're deciding to come into this program, that we're expecting excellence. Like there is no other way, right? So that was the mission, that we were going to show these kids that they can be excellent and that they can thrive in areas that people often believe that they are not capable of thriving in. So having other students that had gone through this intensive academic boot camp of Westville State gave me hope that I could do the same thing. And some of the other people that came in with me. Was it easy? Absolutely not. It was certainly hard. But it was motivational to see that even when we thought we were like falling behind, we had these other these peer counselors, they were called peer counselors, picking us up. It's just a bad day. You got this. You're going to get to that finish line. I think that the way that the program was designed to have other students who had already gone through the process actually stay in the dorms with us and work us through the steps of getting through that 6-week intensive programming was the best thing that they could have done. Because they knew the struggle. They came from our areas. They came from the hoods and the ghettos, and all the things, whatever people want to call it. They came from areas that we came from. They knew what we were up against, and they knew that there were people believing that we weren't going to be able to make it through that intensive 6-week academic program. So when I did make it through, I wanted to get back, and I became a peer counselor every single summer after that. Leading up to graduation, I still came back, and I was part of the residential team for the peer counselor. So I stayed on. I was loyal to the cause. Joan Fuller, I mentioned, who was the director at the time that I was in the program, her saying was each one reach one, each one teach one. And that is rooted. That is rooted in some of the adversity that people of color have faced, right? People trying to tell the story for us, people trying to tell us who we are or label us, and me kind of fighting against that to say, you're not going to tell my story for me. That's my role. So wanting to give back to others in that way kind of sparked an interest in me helping other people. Little side hobby, being interested in astrology too. Gemini match with Aquarius and Libra. That's my family right there for the air signs. But that combined with wanting to help people fight against adversity and really kind of owning their identity and really empowering others really drove home me wanting to get into psychology. That, and then we had some losses in our family. My mom's youngest brother, we had lost. Tragic loss there that definitely prompted me to want to pursue mental health further. Prior to becoming a psychologist, becoming in psychology, I was a program supervisor. They made me a program supervisor at 24 years old. So you got to imagine.
Wow.
I started working for the Key program when I was 22. I think that was back in 2012, somewhere around there. And they thought I had what it takes. But within the first 6 months, I was a shift supervisor. I was up for program supervisor after the 6 months, but it was me against someone who had already been there a little bit longer. So there's an obligation to kind of put that person in the role. A few months after, they gave me my own program. 24 years old, young Black kid, from the hood, right? Being this program, we think that you can be the program supervisor. Like you're going to be in charge of overseeing this home of at-risk youth. You're going to have these staff members that you have to train. You have to hire, train, fire if necessary. You're training them in everything, how to provide care. You're making sure that the kids have what they need. You're also tending to the staff members' needs. You're doing disciplinary action. So I was young. I was very young in that role. And same thing entered my head. Is this imposter syndrome? Why did they choose me? What did they see in me? But I got over that very quickly and realized that, that's exactly where God wanted me to be. Because what was deemed one of the worst programs in that region became one of the best programs in the regions under my watch. So I've never been a quitter. I will say that. I've never been a quitter. I've never allowed someone to kind of define me or think that they got me pinned down in a box or backed up against the wall. If you think that, you're sadly mistaken. So I've always been that type of person, for for sure. So that has driven my passion. I'm passionate about helping others. I certainly don't like bullies, people um, trying to minimize someone's identity or what they have to offer to this world.
You know, being so young and you having that much motivation and inspiration, being, being the youngest in that program to be a director slash manager,
Mhm.
um, and going through that whole phase. I mean, did this make you feel that much more comfortable about psychology? Because it seems like, at this point, that now you're pretty much going to be, the world is going to open up to you where you've got a whole lot coming to you. So, how did that make you feel and how did you deal with that?
I think I think in the beginning a lot of prayer. There was a lot of nights that I went home like asking myself, "What am I doing?" Because I think that the doubt creeps in, but that's just the devil. I feel that or some force trying to tell you that you're not good enough. So I say don't listen to those voices that tell you that you're not good enough. So I think I tell my clients all the time too, or anyone listening, that when you hear those negative voices coming in, you need to combat that with positive thinking. For every negative thought, you need to think six positive things just to combat that one negative thing. So it shows you that the power of the negative mind is definitely impactful if you allow it to be. But you have to continue to show up for yourself. So for me, remembering that I was chosen for a reason. I proved that I have the skill set to do this. And when I reflect on my life, nothing has ever been easy for me. Nothing has ever been easy for me. And I think a lot of people can relate to that, that it's a fight every single day. It's when you think that it's not a fight that you need to reevaluate, because if you think that there's ever a chance where we get the opportunity to become comfortable or complacent, I would say absolutely not. I would say that it's something that we have to continue to work at, as a community. But people like me who are on the forefront, I want to serve as an example to show other people who come from where I come from that you can do the exact same thing that I did, if not better. Anyone who's coming after me, I want you to be better than me. I will actually give you the tools to be better than me, because it's about helping generations continue to build the momentum for change, right? So when I'm gone, I need someone else to pick up that mantle, right? We need to continue showing up for each other, pass the baton to the next sister or brother who's trying to make an impact in this country, and just in mental health altogether, especially surrounding the stigma that we have, lack of trust for people who are in these roles, who can misdiagnose or not be culturally competent, understand traditions and rituals that exist within marginalized communities. I think it's very important that the power of education is everything. So I need to be a force to help make sure that things are being handled with care, not just care, but quality care.
So in this point, from the psychological perspective, uh, can you tell us a little bit as to what are some of the findings, understandings, and disciplines and studies that
Oof.
you have come to the conclusion of reading when it comes to psychology, mental health, and underserved marginalized communities, in particular Black communities?
Yes. Thank you for bringing this up. So when I was in grad school, we had to pick a topic to write about, and the topic that I wrote about that I'm hoping to use for my dissertation moving forward, I'm going to publish as a research paper, is the stigma of therapy within Black and Brown communities. That was very dear to my heart because I believe that in Black and Brown communities, there is an emphasis on keeping things in the home because of there's a cultural mistrust to disclosing things happening within your family to people who don't look like you in your family. That how can you possibly how can you possibly disclose something that's happening within a system that you have already recognized is designed to keep you down? Um, the systems in Black and Brown communities aren't designed for success. They really aren't. So think about all these different types of supports that are put into place, right? But who's monitoring these supports in a way that is thinking progressive? This is the support you have right now, but the hope is to get you to not needing this support for as long as you need it. And there's no one to care about that, right? So it's like if you're getting government support, let's keep you getting that support, and let's make you believe that that's the only thing that you're capable of getting, and that you can't step outside of that support provided by the government to do something different, right? So systems are designed like that, even in education. There are pros and cons to kids going up a grade or kids being retained. I see both sides of it, but I think what makes me feel uncomfortable is if we have children moving on to the next grade that have not cultivated the skills to succeed in the next grade by saying, "Oh, we're just gonna increase the grade by 3 points and give them a passing grade so they can go on to the next grade," just so that the same thing could continue to happen over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. That is a system, right? If we keep adjusting the scale so this kiddo keeps passing, then we're not tending to the fact that they are missing skills. So by the time that kid is in 12th grade, they're feeling hopeless. Well, what have I learned? How can I apply what I've learned to real life circumstances or experiences? And because you don't have that education, now you're looking for other means of survival, right? So what's considered delinquency, truancy, and all these other things, in some regard, this kiddo's way of trying to survive because they have not been taught the necessary skills to survive any other way.
As you mentioned, system programs and, what it's set up to do and how it actually catches people and put them in a box. Um, you know, Give me your philosophy and your thought processes as to a system apparently that's put in place to set these communities up for failure, but then come right back and you want to vilify them at the same time.
Yeah.
What's your opinion of that?
I think that it is a setup to prison pipelines. That if these students don't have the skills that they need, and their family is starving, they're trying to survive, and they don't know any other way to try to make ends meet, and they're just doing what the best that they can do. I think it was designed that way. If the system was designed for you to fail, how can you overcome it? If you depend on also that system to survive in some aspect through government assistance. So it's like, I'll give you a breadcrumb. This is all you're going to get. I know this is not enough. I know you're going to do something different to try to survive. That it is a perpetual cycle of the same stuff over and over and over again. It even exists in academics in terms of testing, right? So this came up in my psychology classes as well. That, in some regard, if you think about the tests that students are expected to take of color, you ask a kid to answer a question about being on a beach in Malibu. That kid can't answer that question about being on a beach in Malibu because that's not his reality. His family's nowhere on the beach in Malibu. So how possibly can he understand that question first and foremost? He's going to look at that question like that question has three heads. What are you talking about? My family don't know what it's like to be on a beach in Malibu, and I'm not sure how much money you're going to pay to get the Malibu with the Malibu drink with the straw. That's not my reality. So it had attention to detail. I'm very detail oriented, and I believe that when we have tests, when we academically, all these things, we need to really tailor to the experiences of the people who are coming into our care, not what we believe they could accomplish. Because yes, we can say that, but if they can't see that in front of them, they're not going to believe that to be true, right? So for me, I feel like I'm always meeting people where they're at, because I understand what it's like not to have. I understand what it's like to be labeled, to be accused of things, everything under the sun, So I feel that, especially in education, this is where we can do a lot of work, right? That on one hand, you want the education to match the experience of the students that are learning. On the second hand, you want to make sure that you're attending to their social and emotional needs as well. Because I don't expect a student who's coming to class depressed to get an A on a test. Does that make them a bad student? Or did I assess where they were at emotionally before I handed them this test? So I think what we're seeing now, especially now in schools, is that there's a strong social emotional component to making sure that we are attending to their needs in that area, you know, because the mind, the emotion, and the action, the body, all that stuff works together as a unit, as a car. You can have a strong engine, but the car does not move without its tires. So if you're just focusing on the academic aspect of the child and not focusing on everything else that's going on with the child, that's only half the picture, right? So I think that so much has gone on for so long and people have been afraid to speak on these things. I am not that. You know, I will speak on every single thing that I've seen as concerns. And I do believe that education is a big concern with how it's being put out to the youth.
Well, when you mentioned the testing and so forth, because I've always wondered, it's not the same for all students, but
Mm-hmm,
when we talk about especially standardized testing,
mm-hmm,
it's been historically known to be racially biased.
mm-hmm,
And so when you come from an underserved and marginalized community, sometimes not all, but some people kind of struggle, when it comes to taking these tests, with tests being set that way,
mm-hmm.
because they've never changed. Um, what are some of the things you're hearing as far as some of your peers as to how they're actually going to change this? Is it going to change? When will it
Mm-hmm.
change? What's that going to look like?
Yeah, great question. I think that so many of us in the field are wearing multiple hats. Like we're not just a therapist, we're the coach, we're the teacher, we're the parent advocate. I think we realize that we have to be those things. So even me, case in point, right? I didn't just settle for a licensed school adjustment counselor, licensed therapist in psychology. I said, no, I want to be in the schools too. I want to put my hat in every single race to support these students and people in general, right? If I have that skill of being detail oriented to catch the small things, then I need to have a seat at every single table to make sure that I can advocate for people who can't advocate for themselves. So you're noticing that when you look at the credentials of therapists, you're seeing a licensed mental health counselor, a school adjustment counselor. You have therapists that are also social workers. You have therapists that are also teachers. So it's like I think in general, I think that because mental health is at an all-time high, I can speak confidently and say that I'm not the only one thinking this, but therapists would believe that we have to take on this role. We realize that sometimes what we do has to extend beyond just the traditional therapy model where clients come into your office and they're laying on a couch and you have your notepad and you keep asking them why, what, who over and over and over again. Like it has to be deeper than that. So when I'm meeting with my clients and their kids especially, I am going to have a session, but I'm also going to have a parent meeting. I'm going to have a school meeting. I'm going to have any meeting I need to have to make sure that they're getting the support that they need across every area of functioning, not just academically, socially, physically. I want to know that they're they're thriving all of those particular areas. So I think that having a type of vigilance, so to speak, is important in this day and age to make sure that things aren't getting missed or pushed aside or being minimized as if it's not important because it's not the majority's concern.
Mm. So, as a Black man pursuing advanced degrees in psychology, did you ever feel like an outsider in academic spaces? And how did you navigate that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that I think that people believe, I don't know if all people believe this, but let me just say this. There's no peachy road for a person of color who's achieving a higher education. Some of it has to do with the fact that a lot of times you are one of two Black people on a predominantly white campus if you don't go to a historically Black college or university, right? So I didn't go to like a Howard or anything like that. I went to a predominantly white college in Massachusetts where I was one of two in the class, which was a culture shock. I think to some degree, it is a culture shock when you're sitting in these classes because by default, you have to be the voice for everyone who looks like you. That is a lot of responsibility. When you walk into a classroom and you see that you are one of two, and you are one of two who can speak to your experience, and there are 25 to 30 other people in that class who look nothing like you. So with that, there's an added pressure. A part of me recognizes that was going to be the case anyways, right? Because it was difficult to matriculate into the campus. It was not easy. I think it was designed that way because the leaders that recruited us knew what we were going to be up against. So as much as it's about intellectual capacities, it's about how can you handle your emotional responses when you are in these spaces with majority not looking like you and a different type of microaggressions that can come up. Okay. It's not always direct on a campus. It might be sly, right? So I think about situations that have happened to me where, being one or two in a class full of Caucasian Americans, white people, where the teacher is having everyone in the class say, tell me where you're from. I want to know about your family history. And people can say, oh, well, my family's French, or my family's from Russia or Australia, whatever, you name it, right? And then getting to the Black people, and we're like, well, we know that we're African American. And then the response not being, well, okay, it's really, you don't know which African tribe you're from. So things like that, right? It's not necessarily in your face, but it's in your face. So just little things. Or, you're walking with your friends and someone walks past you and your friends that don't look like you and your friends, and they're like, the moment, the music, you better never let it go. Right? So having those experiences, I think, so for me, the way that I respond to that particular situation is I'm going to say, hello, my name is Alan Michael Chess, because you're not going to use, yes, I love that song, right? We all love that song, duh. But you're not going to use that as a way to try to kind of frame my background or who I come from, that, we're all about like hardcore rap music and stuff like that. We can do that and we can still be scholars in the academic settings. So I think, kind of experiencing that really lit my fire to be able to sit in this seat and be a voice for someone who's experienced those types of adversities, especially on a college campus. You will see it not directly in your face, right? But little comments, little undertones of discrimination, racism, microaggressions, things like that kind of come up over the years, which led to me creating the movement when I was in Westfield State.
Wow. So, so how has your formal training in psychology and counseling directly shaped the way you approach your work with clients, entrepreneurs, and communities?
Yeah. So what I studied in college, grad school, was a trauma track. Obviously, for me, trauma resonates with me because I believe that because there is this stigma of therapy within Black and Brown communities that we don't seek back then. We did not seek out therapy. It was not something that we did, right? We handle things within the house. So I think me wanting to kind of shift that lens, I realized that there was importance for someone like me who was pursuing a higher education to be in that seat to where I could study trauma. Trauma being like the most impactful thing I've studied in my psychology program was trauma. And then secondary to trauma, some of the other things like family systems and what other things would be like violence in communities, things like this, things that impact people of color. I was really attuned to when I was in my programming. So trauma combined with my training in DBT, which is dialectical behavioral therapy. DBT was created by Marsha Linehan, Dr. Marsha Linehan, the creator of DBT, who was diagnosed with schizophrenia, right? She was diagnosed with schizophrenia, and she ended up becoming a doctor and creating one of the most prominent treatment modalities utilized in therapy, DBT, right? What I love about DBT and how that connects to trauma is that DBT is action-oriented. What we see with CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, is that there's a lot of focus on what's happening in the mind, right? The thoughts, because it's believed that the thoughts create emotions or feelings that then create actions. The actions oftentimes being impulsive behavior, doing a behavior that's going to lead to some type of pain, suffering, or consequence, right? So with DBT, we take it a step further and say, yes, we recognize these thoughts, but we want to build some skills, some action-oriented steps that we can take to try to decrease the intensity of an emotion that one might be feeling at any given moment or time. And I think that resonates with me. especially in my work with trauma in individuals, because oftentimes individuals do have intense emotions and they don't know where to put them. They don't know what to do with it. They don't know how to make sense of it. So for me, we're going to slow it down. Let's slow this train down a little bit to get to the root of where this is. If we can name it, if we can rate the intensity of it, we can figure out how to decrease that number. I always say that, you know, my work is never to be a fixer. It's about guiding. So I'm going to show you the tools, but it's up to you to use those tools that's going to cultivate that change you need to feel better and to minimize the emotional suffering that you're experiencing at any given time. So that resonates with my communities that I'm a part of, the adversities that I've faced in my career and just in my upbringing, educational journey of getting to this point.
In your clinical experience, what are the most common psychological and emotional struggles you've seen surface among Black men and women in America?
Yep. What I see is lack of a sense of belonging. Always kind of feeling like the cards are stacked against you. I take two steps forward to get knocked 6 steps back. I think that many people of color will resonate with that, you know, as much as I try to get ahead in life, it seems like there's always something around the corner waiting to knock me down and make me feel like I'm not good enough. So I believe a part of it is that when you have people of color striving to do more, to improve their lives, we are often challenged by our own thoughts of not being good enough or not feeling like we belong, because society has told us that we're not good enough and that we don't belong, right? So I said it before, I'll say it again, that if you have the media, social media, news outlets kind of portraying the person of color one way, and that's all you're seeing, why would you believe that you can be anything else if the society has already told you who you are, right? So I believe that's a part of the battle, is that what we're fighting against is we're trying to tell our own stories, but we're being faced with what majority entities might feel we are based on limited education, ignorance, stereotypes, all these other types of things. So I believe that we're up against rewriting the narratives and retelling the stories that need to be told by us, you know. I think having people like you and like me with platforms is super important, because we are the faces of this thing and we're showing others that it can be done, and it can be done the way that we want it to be done. It's super important that we empower ourselves and know you're not an imposter. Yes, you are good enough. Yes, you are smart enough. Yes, you are strong. Yes, you have what it takes. Yes, you can roll with the best of them. Who told you that you couldn't? Because that would be my question. Who told you that you couldn't do it? And why did you believe it? So that's my message right there, is that we challenge what society puts out there. We don't just believe it because society wants it to be true. That's for society to figure out. I'm going to tell my story, and I invite everyone else to do the same.
So, you know, with the psychological effects of that, and how psychology works in itself, how would you psychologically look at society and culture that tries to reframe or change that narrative or that story for Black and Brown communities? Because
Yeah,
it's like they're throwing just the opposite. You know what I'm saying? Because it's like looking in the mirror. So I don't like myself, so let me throw this out, and this is what we put out.
yeah, it is. I think what's often missed. So cultural competency, I would say, as when I started in the field, was when I believe that cultural competency was starting to get like a big momentum. I don't believe that, at least in my own upbringing, that there were many cultural considerations in terms of why someone could present with a specific behavior. I believe that is a big part of it. That what do we mean when we say cultural competency, right? What does that mean? I think that I always ask people these things, even if I think I have a meaning in my mind. I'm like, well, what does it mean for you? Because what's cultural competency for me can mean something different to someone else. So I believe that we really have to define what these things actually are. If we're gonna say what cultural competency is, what does that mean? What does one have to embody to be a cultural competent therapist. I mean, a lot of times it's not being from the same side of the tracks as the person that you're meeting with. And it's certainly not a requirement to meeting with someone. But what you need to have is empathy to this person's experience, right? So if a client comes in and they say, yeah, this is my story and this was just really horrible for me. And then the response is, it couldn't have been that bad. That is, to me, a breach in cultural competency because you're minimizing my experience. So I think that a part of it is recognizing that we're not there necessarily to form an opinion on someone's story. We're there to help them work through what they believe their story actually is. And rather agreeing or not agreeing with how detrimental that experience was, we can recognize in a moment by what we can see and by what we hear that was a very tumultuous experience for them nonetheless. So you have to be careful. Language matters. Have to be very, very careful not to try to minimize someone's story or downplay someone's experience just because we don't believe it's that big of a deal.
Right. Mental health stigma in the Black community is a real common, thing. It's real. It's a big barrier. How have you personally witnessed that stigma, and what strategies do you use to break it down?
Yeah, I believe the stigma exists when traditions should be more considered. There's a criteria. So whenever we have a client coming to us, we always assess for the presenting problem. I always say, I don't like to use the word problem either. I say, what is the reason for why you're seeking support, right? How can I support you? How can I help you? That's the approach I take as opposed to what is your presenting problem? Or chief complaint is another word that's used when we're assessing someone for a diagnosis. So we always want to know why they're there. Why are you here? How can I help you? You have to look at the onset. That is when the presenting concern, the chief complaint, the reason for support would have begun. What was the issue that caused the person to want to seek therapy? Sometimes it's a year, sometimes it's 6 months, but we want to know a time frame. We also want to look at the frequency. We want to look at the frequency, how often, the intensity, how bad, like how bad is it, right? How bad is it impacting you? But also the duration. When you do have symptoms, how long is it lasting? Those are the 4 things that you want to ask when you are completing an intake assessment with a client. Oftentimes, we also have to, well, not often, always. We should always be asking about religion, spirituality, cultural practices, and rituals. This is something that is not all, sometimes it can be missed, right? If you're not taking the time to make sure that you're attuned to that. But if you're meeting with a client that comes from a different ethnic background than you, I find that it's super crucial that you're asking questions about religion, spirituality, rituals, and traditions. Why that is because if you don't know this client and they say, let's say I come from a family where, we believe that spirits, we sit down at the kitchen table and we share our dinner with spirits, right? That is not a diagnosis. That is a cultural belief. People believe that they talk to their ancestors. These things have to be carefully assessed, right? Are these a part of something that you come up to know in your life? Different cultures believe in different things. But if you're not careful, because of what a culture could believe, a client can be misdiagnosed very easily, misdiagnosed. If it's believed, okay, well, this client's talking about seeing this thing or that thing, and from someone who's not from that culture or don't understand how that culture has cultivated this belief over their generations, it's believed that this client has a diagnosis because this is something that they actually believe to be true. We know that, Native American culture, right? They believe in spirit guides and things like that. Would you give them a diagnosis of something that would suggest that they were delusional or having visual hallucinations because they believe in a spiritual ancestor that comes to them at night and offers them guidance? So you have to be careful. And I think, so for me, that's the big thing, is that we are careful, attention to detail, and we're careful and we're asking the right questions as providers who document this information.
Wow. So So, what role does intergenerational trauma play in the mental health challenges facing Black communities today, and how do you address it in your practice?
Oh, good, great question. So I just spoke about this recently, about trauma, and I believe that generationally, trauma can take impact, if behaviors that one would want to change or modify continue amongst generations. So the idea of keeping things within the household, and not speaking on things that kind of happen or impacted the family, that can be a contributor or a vulnerability that can speak to generational trauma. Think about it as this way: eventually, children grow up and become adults. Um, Early attachment years, from birth to 4 years old, is when children are learning to cultivate attachment. They're learning how to express need, wants, gratitude, things like that through parents giving hugs and feeding and spending time with them. So you learn the base of what you learn about relationships. You learn from home, your first household with mom, dad, or whatever the family makeup is. Based on those skills, you then, once you're old enough, you create your own household, and we subconsciously recreate the dynamic that we had when we were back home with our parents. If we're not aware of it, we're not always aware that we're doing it, but if this is the only way I've seen communication happen growing up, that's the way I'm going to utilize communication in my home, right? So because of that, it creates patterns of trauma that continue to carry on throughout generations, because throughout the generations, maybe family has learned only one way to communicate. Maybe family has learned only one way to express anger. Maybe family has learned only one way to express love, or like there might be abandonment concerns. So there's like a carryover, that kind of goes on as this family. Those kids grow up, they have their family. Those kids grow up, they have their family. And before you know it, you have generations of a family that have learned to communicate in the same exact way, but it's not a helpful way because their needs aren't being met, and they're experiencing heightened depression, anxiety, and all these other types of things. So a lot of the work that I do in my practice is I help the clients recognize that. We go back to the source, right? Sometimes it's creating a family genogram. Tell me about your family on both sides of the family. We often ask questions about what does trauma look like on both sides of the family as well, to give us some insight into how this client has learned to navigate depression, anxiety, and all these other type of social emotional concerns. But typically, that's it. Looking at the family unit itself and trying to correlate how the current dynamic, if it's not a family, even if it's with a boyfriend or girlfriend, husband and wife, how you recreated some of those same dynamics in your current situation.
Mm. You know what's interesting about that is, dynamics. It seems like everything is based on a societal situation.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we think about these dynamics, sometimes, people find themselves basically conforming and trying to fit in.
Yeah.
And so when I think about this, I think about the psychological trauma, impact, destruction of Black and Brown communities because of this crazy dynamic that's set up, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so basically, I just wanted to say this in leading into this question, which is, how do you bridge the gap between academic psychology, which is often
Mm-hmm.
very Eurocentric in its foundations, and the lived realities of Black people in America?
Woo, loaded question. Love it. All right, like my favorite baked potato. Um, let's say this, right? So, if you are very comprehensive, you should really touch upon all those areas. So last in the first meeting you and I had here, I had talked about the 7 areas of wellness. That you have to look at each aspect of a person's life and assess how they're functioning on each area, 10 being the highest and satisfactory functioning, and then 1 being the least. That's spiritual, occupational, environmental, social, physical, emotional, and intellectual. That you are really getting a sense and assessing where the client is in every aspect of life in those areas.